Hello, dear aviator. This video's topic is wingtip vortices and wake turbulence. If you are ready, let's jump into it. What do you think happens to the air when an aircraft flies by? The exhaust coming out of aircraft engines looks pretty dangerous, generating huge amounts of thrust and pushing back tons of hot air. Would it surprise you to know that the most dangerous part of an aircraft's wake is not the engine exhaust? By far the strongest component of wake turbulence is the swirling air generated at the tips of the aircraft's wings. This circular motion of air around the tip of the aircraft wing is called a wingtip vortex. How are wingtip vortices formed? When air flows over the aircraft wing, the shape of the airfoil creates low pressure above the wing and relatively higher pressure below the wing. The pressure differential results in a net force on the wing pushing it in the upward direction. This is called lift. Air always flows from a region of high pressure to a region of low pressure. So, in the case of the aircraft wing, air tends to flow from below the wing to the upper surface of the wing. The movement of air happens at the wingtip, where the airflow moves out from under the wing, swirls around the tip, and tries to enter the low-pressure region at the top. The circular motion that the air takes is called a vortex. Since it's generated at the wingtip, it's called a wingtip vortex. The vortices aren't just confined to the wingtip, though. The rotational movement of the air has inertia, and it continues to spread out behind the wingtip. The vortices increase in diameter but decrease in intensity as time passes. These are called trailing vortices, and they extend for quite a distance behind the aircraft. Are wingtip vortices visible? Even though wingtip vortices are present whenever the aircraft is airborne, the swirling air usually doesn't leave any visible signs of its existence. But, on very humid days, you might be able to see the core of the vortex trailing back from the wingtip. This is actually a type of contrail. Contrails are condensation trails, clouds that look like lines tracing the aircraft's path across the sky. The most commonly seen contrails in aircraft are formed by the hot engine exhaust meeting the cold air. Obviously, there's no engine exhaust coming out from the wingtip. What's causing the condensation there? The answer is pressure change. The airflow inside the vortex core is spinning at a very high speed and has very low pressure. This reduces the temperature of the air inside. If the temperature drops below the local dew point temperature, the moisture in the air condenses rapidly, forming a small cloud right at the tip of the wing. But if you're looking at an aircraft flying high at cruising altitude, the contrails that you see are from the engines, not the vortices. The best chances of seeing contrails from wingtip vortices are when the aircraft is flying at low speeds and low altitudes on humid days. These vortices are present at other locations where there are discontinuities in airflow as well. They're present and occasionally visible at the ends of the aircraft flaps when they are extended for takeoff or landing. Another area where there's a big pressure differential is at the fan blades of turbofan engines operating at a high power setting, such as on takeoff. If you look inside the engine intake during a takeoff run, you might see condensation fog inside the engine intake if it's humid enough. Propeller and rotor tips are another area where you might see contrails formed by tip vortices, although they look like a series of spirals instead of straight lines. The best way to see the shape of the vortices is if you see the aircraft pass through some smoke or some cloud. Wingtip vortices are a byproduct of lift. Once the wing stops producing lift, the vortices dissipate instantly. If you see an aircraft landing on a cold day when the vortices are visible, you'll see that they disappear the moment the aircraft raises the wing spoilers. Wing spoilers drastically reduce the lift generated by the wing. As soon as the spoilers rise, the wing stops generating enough lift to support the weight of the aircraft, and the vortices cease. What's happening inside the vortex? As seen from the aircraft's tail, the vortex rotates in the anti-clockwise direction on the right wingtip and the clockwise direction on the left wingtip. The rush of air travels downward from the underside of the wing as it rotates around the tip. This downward movement of air is called downwash. It's the strongest right at the wingtip and decreases in intensity as you move along the span to the wing root. The downwash deflects the airflow behind the wing, pushing it downwards. So, why is this important? It's important because the lift is always produced perpendicular to the relative wind. Now that the relative wind is inclined, the lift does not point straight up and is in fact being generated at an angle. This means that only part of the lift is now acting vertically, and some of it is being wasted by acting backward in the horizontal direction. This horizontal component of lift is called induced drag. It's called induced drag since it only exists as a consequence of lift. If you're generating lift, you're stuck with induced drag as well. Why don't we want wingtip vortices? The entire purpose of a wing is to develop a pressure differential that provides lift, but the high-pressure air leaking out into the low-pressure region reduces the pressure differential. The reduced pressure differential means that the wing is now generating less lift than it should. Reduced lift for a given quantity of airflow means that you'll need more airflow in order to achieve the amount of lift you need to bear the weight of the aircraft. How do you get increased airflow? If you fly faster, you'll have more airflow over the wing, but doing so requires more engine power and consumes more fuel. An alternate way of getting the lift you need is by flying with an increased angle of attack. This again means you'll have to increase engine power. The vortices generated at the wingtips consume a pretty significant amount of energy to rotate the air. There's no such thing as a free lunch in physics, so it's your engines that have to work harder to account for this wasted energy. These high-energy trailing vortices persist in the air long after the aircraft has passed by. This is bad news for any other aircraft unfortunate enough to meet them. How are vortices dangerous? As high-intensity swirling air in the vortex can extend for quite a distance behind an aircraft, it poses a danger to any aircraft following or crossing its flight path. The trailing vortices are also called an aircraft's wake, and the disturbed air is called wake turbulence. Encountering light wake turbulence just makes the ride a bit bumpy. But if you fly closer behind an aircraft, you'll be flying into a vortex that's still fairly well developed. This swirling air can induce a roll if it's strong enough. The intensity of the rolling effect experienced depends on the preceding aircraft's wingspan and the strength of the vortex. When the aircraft encounters a vortex and it's strong enough to induce roll, the pilot counters it by using the ailerons against the roll and tries to fly out of the wake as soon as possible. Vortex behavior. The tricky thing about wake turbulence and wingtip vortices is that they are invisible. They can only be avoided by predicting their behavior. The pilots need to visualize the wake from other traffic and ensure that they are flying far enough behind for the vortices to dissipate from the leading aircraft. Pilots need to know how vortices behave and dissipate so that they can predict their movement and avoid catching wake turbulence. The vortex movement changes when they're within a couple of hundred feet to the ground. If they're generated by a large aircraft flying at 1,000 or 2,000 feet, the vortices won't have deteriorated entirely by the time they sink to the ground. As the swirling air strikes the ground, the vortex is pushed laterally along the surface. Pilots need to keep this behavior in mind as they're likely to encounter these vortices while they're on approach or during departure. This lateral movement takes place at a speed of about 2 or 3 knots. Wake turbulence categories. As vortex size and intensity depend largely on the mass of the aircraft, aircraft are classified into different categories depending on the amount of wake turbulence they generate. Air traffic controllers uses this classification to separate aircraft and ensure that their wake turbulence does not affect other aircraft. These rules are based on the fact that generally, larger and heavier aircraft generate intense vortices. Similarly, the effect of flying through wake turbulence is felt more severely by light aircraft, whereas heavy aircraft have so much inertia that even moderately strong wake turbulence doesn't pose a danger to them. The ICAO wake turbulence category is entered in the appropriate single-character wake turbulence category indicator in Item 9 of the ICAO Model Flight Plan form and is based on the maximum certificated takeoff mass as follows. 1. J. Super. At present, the only such type is the Airbus A380, with a maximum takeoff mass in the order of 560,000 kilograms. 2. H. Heavy. Aircraft types of 136,000 kilograms or more, except those specified as J. 3. M. Medium. Aircraft types less than 136,000 kilograms and more than 7,000 kilograms. And 4. L. Light. Aircraft types of 7,000 kilograms or less. Variants of an aircraft type may fall into different wake turbulence categories. In these cases, it is the responsibility of the pilot or operator to enter the appropriate wake turbulence category indicator in the flight plan. The International Civil Aviation Organization has established different rules for in-flight separation, approach separation, and arrival and departure separation. Minimum distances apply whenever an aircraft directly follows another at the same altitude or less than 1,000 feet below it, or If both aircraft are using the same runway or parallel runways separated by less than 760 meters, or an aircraft is crossing behind another aircraft at the same altitude or less than 300 meters, 1,000 feet, below. You can see the separation minimas in the table. How pilots avoid vortices on takeoff and landing. Takeoff and landing are critical sections of flight. The aircraft is in close proximity to the ground, and there's not a lot of time or altitude available to regain control of the aircraft if you find yourself in a vortex. While ATC does space departures and arrivals to allow time for the wake to dissipate, the final responsibility for wake avoidance lies with the pilot. The most reliable way for avoiding wake turbulence is waiting till it dissipates. But for operations at busy airports or at uncontrolled airfields, the pilots can use these guidelines for minimizing the chances of a wake encounter. Avoiding vortices in flight. Air traffic control doesn't just make sure aircraft don't collide with each other, they also direct aircraft to avoid each other's wake turbulence. Generally, they'll be using procedures for separating IFR traffic, but they may also issue guidance for VFR traffic. VFR traffic flies under the see and avoid approach. It's the pilot's responsibility not just to avoid collisions with other aircraft, but also to anticipate their wake turbulence and avoid that as well. A little extra situational awareness doesn't hurt though, and if ATC notices your flight path crosses someone else's wake, they advise you of the position, speed, direction of flight, altitude, and aircraft type to give you a better idea of where and how intense their wake might be. ATC can also remind you to exercise caution, wake turbulence, and you'd be well advised not to take that warning lightly. An absence of ATC warnings doesn't mean you can assume your flight path to be clear of wake turbulence. Pilots are always responsible for the safe operation of the flight. If there's any doubt about adequate separation, pilots should always play it safe and ask ATC about traffic in their area. Avoiding helicopter outwash. The rotors of a helicopter also generate vortices at their tips. When they are hovering close to the ground, downwash from the rotor bounces off from the ground and spreads outward. These vortices can be dangerous within 3 rotor diameters, so watch out for helicopters that are hovering or hovering taxiing, particularly those that are upwind from a runway. When they are flying forwards, helicopters produce trailing wake vortices that are very similar to those from an aircraft. Remember that helicopters fly a lot slower than aircraft. The wake they generate during forwarding flight can be a lot stronger than you might expect. How to reduce wingtip vortices? Given that wingtip vortices create the drag, reduce lift, and pose a danger to other aircraft, aircraft manufacturers developed several methods to reduce vortex generation. Take a look back at what happens to vortices when the aircraft is flying in ground effect. The proximity of the ground impedes the airflow around the wingtip, and the effect is very noticeable. Aircraft manufacturers attach barriers on the tips of the wings to achieve the same result, preventing airflow around the wingtip. The disadvantages of winglets. The downside of adding winglets and tip tanks is that they increase weight and act as an additional source of parasitic drag. A set of Boeing 737 winglets weigh more than 250 pounds. The weight of the winglet bends the wing down and adds a significant amount of stress to the wing. This requires the wing to be strengthened, which adds even more weight. The gain in fuel efficiency more than makes up for the parasitic drag created by the winglets, which is why they are installed on most aircraft being built today. Winglets don't come cheap though, and they are only really effective during cruises. This makes them economically viable, mostly for long-haul aircraft. Unfortunately, their effectiveness at reducing wake turbulence is very limited during the times when it's needed the most. The wake turbulence is largest when the aircraft is flying slowly, and winglets are least effective at low speeds. The case against tapered wingtips is that it greatly increases the aircraft's wingspan. That makes it harder for the aircraft to fit into hangars and airport gates. A solution to this problem is brought by Boeing in the 777X aircraft, which is fitted with foldable tapered wingtips. Here is the end of the video. If you find it helpful for your career, give a like and subscribe to channel. See you in the other videos. Goodbye.